Well, the week dominated, of course, by the arrests of 7 people for corruption related to the Free State Housing Department's asbestos project. Today, the 7 were granted bail. One of the accused having to pay R500,000 in bail. 2 of them bail of R50,000. The rest bail of R100,000. But it has been a tumultuous week. Earlier, the former head of the Police Crime Intelligence Unit, Richard Mdluli, also started a jail term. Andile Lungisa elected to stay in jail despite the fact that he was granted bail by the High Court sitting in Makhanda last week. Dr. Somadoda Fikeni is a political analyst. You'll know him well, of course. Dr. Fikeni, Professor, good afternoon to you. Firstly, the fact that people have now been arrested, a court process has started in the Free State, based to an extent on testimony at the Zondo Commission. How important is this moment?
Well, that is quite important in a sense that the country has been calling for action, and they have been patient waiting for this moment to come. So now that you finally have this happening, it might be because of a cumulative factor of public pressure, but also the PPE scandal has put a lot more pressure, and it might also be the fact that these agencies were taking their time to be meticulous in collecting information which was already airing in the Zondo Commission.
There were some people outside the court today supporting one of the accused, the former Mangaung Mayor, Oliam Lamleli. What does it say when people are outside a court, someone who's accused of corruption? And we've seen this before in the ANC.
Well, I do think that it is quite an awkward and a very difficult situation to be one of the supporters of the ANC in nowadays, because you'll have many of these scenes where supporters go to court, and most of the time when you listen to their arguments, they are not saying the individuals are not guilty, but rather they are trying to weaponize and even politicize this by saying it's a political witch hunt, or junior people are being sought after, whereas there are heavyweights who remain untouched. That in itself may also put pressure for the NPA, the Hawks and other related agencies to go up the ladder.
Yesterday in Mpumalanga, a former MEC appeared in court accused of one of the most awful crimes against his 2 8-year-old twin girls. I'm sure you'll know the story, Prof. There were people outside that court supporting him too. And I mean, if you look at what he's accused of, it's frankly incredible.
Well, remember that in South Africa we have reached a moment of a society of the absurd, and we have gone beyond bizarre. Remember that even the pastors like Amotoso, who are criticized of similar sexual harassment, and several other people, they do come and have some people who support them. And some of them do not even present facts to say why they would even associate themselves with supporting such figures. Everything now has been weaponized. They would say there's a witch hunt, there's conspiracy, and that is the reason why it is very important that investigators are meticulous, and once you start having convictions and speedy trials, it is likely going to silence most of the supporters.
The other thing, of course, is once you get to the point of hearing witness testimony, if you hear witness after witness giving a statement against someone or in support of someone, and then you have that conviction or that acquittal in public based on the evidence that we've all seen, that really changes the game, doesn't it? Doesn't that change, I hate this word, it changes the narrative?
It changes the narrative in the main, but you do have the hardcore supporters. Take the same case of Pastor Amotoso. There were many narratives. There were many people who had tearful, submissions into court as to what they experienced. But still, you had some people who say they believe in them, and they believe in him, and they will support him through and through. So, as a society, I do think that there is an element of pathology where we no longer know what is wrong and what is right in the clearest sense, and be outraged. Even if we supported or love certain people, there ought to be a line where you say, when certain things which are wrong happen based on principle, one ought to condemn them, even if you may ask for pardon and forgiveness. But that sometimes you have supporters who have no remorse, who simply say there are many others who have done worse, they have not been caught. We're now on a slippery slope of moral relativism.
You talk about moral relativism. There's probably a conversation that comes as part of this around political identity and the formation of political identities in South Africa. How do we go back to actually knowing what the right thing is? How do we, as South Africans, find our moral compass?
Well, I do think that we need to have a giant national conscientization process where active, conscious citizenship is cultivated. Because for now, we have surrendered most of our sovereignty and even thinking to leaders, some of whom have evolved into cult movements where people follow them religiously, not with any critical thinking. And that is why you do have instances of people who follow certain individuals no matter what. And such individuals might have stabbed somebody. They will accuse that person for running towards the knife.
It's a very good way to put it. One of the definitions of a nation state, and I mean there'll be plenty of definitions, but one of the definitions is that government is the only body that has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. And what that definition really speaks to is a working, functioning criminal justice system. In other words, the state has a mechanism to decide who stays free and who goes to jail for breaking the law. If the National Prosecuting Authority doesn't work, it could be argued that that condition that would make South Africa a nation state no longer exists. Do you believe this week the NPA has shown that that condition does now exist?
Well, I do think that people ought to be optimistic but be cautious, because these are early signals that the NPA might be working. These are the early signals that the hawks might have developed their claws again. But remember, we still have a long way. What happens when the big political guns are now targeted? Will we see the same political pressure? Will we see the interference with the process? Because the biggest problem here is you have criminal incidents, which are what they are, but we've tried to see in the past political interpretation and political intervention to solve them. And that is where tension is coming in. If law enforcement is allowed to do its work, then politics can actually follow and run alongside. But where politics do interfere, we have seen disastrous consequences where it's a rule by law rather than rule of law, where everybody is equal before the law.
The National Executive Committee of the ANC is in a meeting this afternoon. It's a virtual Lekgotla. The virtual Lekgotla will continue on Monday. They are involving some of the alliance partners, and the alliance partners themselves have been quite strong on corruption. COSATU saying that it blamed President President Cyril Ramaphosa for corruption because it had happened on his watch. The SACP welcomed the arrests this week. Do you think this issue is going to come up at that Lekgotla, or do you think that it might not quite be in the interests of the people in the ANC NEC to bring it up?
Well, I do think that ANC is a divided entity. They might be tentative in approaching a matter this sensitive, but at the same time there'll be so much pressure to have political intervention, and others might simply say, let's leave it to the law enforcement, and we may even issue a statement to say we believe in the rule of law, and as such we hope that there is fairness in the process. So they may go as far as that, but getting into intervening or even trying to second guess what is happening is precisely the problem they have experienced in the past. But there are other implications here. They might be trying to understand why these things have happened, and also the implications for the party funding, because it looks like even the party funding itself is coming under question. Questions such as, if monies were deposited to individual treasurer generals, did they make their way to the ANC itself? And what are the tax ramifications here? And all those kinds of challenges will be coming in, and NEC of the ANC cannot ignore them for too long.
Edwin Sodi appeared in the Mzondo Commission on Tuesday. He said there that he had given the ANC 3 million rand. On Wednesday he was arrested, and on Thursday the ANC couldn't pay salaries.
Well, issue of paying not salaries has been ongoing for some time. It might be an indication of an organization that is now struggling to actually fundraise. It might as well be that some of the fundraising was happening within the shady spaces of what might not have been appropriate or what might have come from government's own, tenders. And with the new law of the disclosure of who is funding the political party, it might not just be the ANC, but also other parties who might be affected. In addition to that, many businesses may just walk away from funding political parties and they may plead poverty due to COVID-19 when the actual reason is that they might fear association at this stage where that information might be disclosed, especially those who are mainly utilizing or rendering services to government.
We do have to mention the name Ace Magashule, and whenever I mention his name in these conversations, it's important to point out that at this stage, as far as I'm aware, there is no investigation into him, but we have seen plenty of evidence enter the public domain through books, through the Zondo Commission and elsewhere. Do you think he's a nervous man this weekend?
Well, I do think that even Ace Magashule and other political leaders of the ANC might be worried because with the net closing and people associated with them, they may not always be lucky and be free from being implicated. But even if in another scenario they are not implicated, they might find that the people around them who might have assisted in any political campaign within the factions might be so constrained, so compromised that it becomes very difficult for the next campaigns to launch up another campaign which is well resourced. Because right now, also on trial, is the relationship between business and politics.
And I mean, in relation to all of that, the Secretary General has said several times that he would not step down if he was accused of corruption. We've seen that the NEC decision to confirm that ANC conference resolution that people implicated in corruption or charged with corruption must step aside. Interestingly, the definition of step aside, I think, is now being contested. But I suspect that there's still going to be a lot more fighting over that.
Without any doubt, you might be having an interesting battle within the ANC where they are now pitted against the very policy resolutions they've taken in the past. But because they have not been consistent, even with the previous leadership, it might be difficult for them to live up to that, especially when they are so factionalized, especially when some of the NEC members stand to lose if you follow that particular principle to its very logical conclusion. So you might be having here a tussle between does might makes it right or is right right? That might be the challenge that they are facing, where you say, if I have a political muscle, I remain immune. In that case, you might have a situation where ANC leaders say, let's step back and allow the government infrastructure of law enforcement to take over, even if we remain paralyzed as a party to do anything.